U.S. Supreme Court granted a win to Maine State Representative Laurel Libby, who was censured by the Democratic-controlled Maine House for insisting in a private social media post that it's wrong to let boys rob girls of championship titles in sports. Now, her petition for an injunction was approved by the court, a triumph she called a victory not just for my constituents, but for the Constitution itself. Here to explain the significance of the court's decision is Maine State Representative Laurel Libby. Representative Libby, welcome back to Washington Watch, and congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do want to commend you for your courage in standing up, and I'm going to let you explain what has transpired here. But as you stood up to the Democratic-controlled legislature, they said, well, if you apologize for stating the truth, then we'll let you speak. And you refused to fold. And I want to commend you for your courage. So the court, you appealed to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. They kind of pushed it aside. You went to the Supreme Court. So what does this decision that the court handed down on Tuesday mean?
We filed an emergency application with the Supreme Court specifically to get my vote back while the lower courts are considering what to do with my case. So the entire case, voice and vote, is still pending before the First Circuit Court of Appeals. But thankfully, the Supreme Court did see fit to take up the emergency application. And as of today, I am able to now vote on behalf of my constituents. So today I voted for the first time in almost 3 months, representing my constituents fully.
Did the speaker apologize for keeping you from voting?
No, and I still am not able to speak, but I can vote. I don't expect an apology. I wouldn't expect an apology because I don't think it would be truthful.
So your ability to speak has not been restored?
Correct. That's part of the case that's still pending before the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Will be heard on June 5th regarding the full case.
So the Supreme Court just forced the legislature to allow you to vote to represent your constituents but not speak on their behalf?
Correct. They are required to count my vote now.
You know, it was interesting in one of the justices who, writing in opposition to the ruling, said, "There's no reason, no big hurry. You know, there's nothing, no votes pending that her vote would make a difference." I mean, so that's how we decide whether or not someone has a right to represent their constituents if we think it's going to matter.
You know, there's so many things about this case that matter so much, but, you know, the Constitution, my constituents' constitutional right to representation, my right to free speech, these are core to our democracy. And I'm glad that 7 of the justices saw fit to ensure that my constituents do have representation. I think it's an incredibly slippery slope and a terrible precedent to set, not just in Maine, but across the country, if this were allowed to stand.
Now, I am certain that when you posted on Facebook comparing a guy who pole vaulted the year before and placed 5th to this year, pretending to be a female winning 1st in women's pole vaulting, I imagine you never thought you would be going down this path.
Never in a million years. Never in a million years. But, you know, a lot of folks have asked me if I would do anything differently, and I really can't say that I would. I think so much has come to light here in Maine with how Maine women and girls are being discriminated against, and really the tyranny going on in Augusta, pushing an agenda that Maine people do not agree with. And so I'm thankful that so much has come to light as a result, and I think it's worth anything that has happened in between.
So, Representative Libby, let me ask you this question, and I'm going to get personal for just a moment. How has this affected you in the process? What have you learned? How has this impacted you and your family?
Well, certainly we've had some conversations that I never anticipated, given that my kids are still growing up. They're still relatively young. But I think that we've all learned a lot in the last 3 months. And I certainly do not take it for granted to have the right to free speech, to have the right to represent the good people of Auburn and Minot. I'm grateful for a lot these days.
has it strengthened you in your faith and in your commitment to standing for these principles no matter what, knowing that, ultimately the truth does come out, but we have to be willing to stand for it?
I certainly have seen an outpouring of God's grace over the last few months, and faithfulness. At times it has not been easy, but he has been faithful. And we've seen that every day. And so it's been a hard but blessed 3 months.
I would like to say that you were the outlier, that no one else is ever going to have to face this again. But the reality is, in the world in which we're living, this is becoming more of the norm of simply standing up for truth and being challenged and being rejected in an effort to silence and cancel. What would you say to others out there that may run into a similar situation?
There were multiple reasons that I did not back down and apologize, but that's certainly one of them. Because if you're speaking the truth and can be bullied into backing down or apologizing for speaking the truth, I think it sets a really terrible example to the next generation, these women and girls who are watching and seeing our example. I think that we need to set the standard, and that is to speak up for truth and not back down.
Well, I think you have set a sterling example of doing it in a gracious way, but in a firm, unyielding way. Truth is truth, and we need to stand upon it. So I again want to commend you and thank you, Laurel, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.